Hello supply chain friends. So recently when I posted the video on the topic of how to make $100,000 or more in a supply chain job, I got a lot of questions from you, but some of the questions were very intriguing. For example, Ramesh from Chicago asked me, I'm already making $100,000. I'm a middle manager in supply chain, but I really want to know what are the skills I need to focus on in order to become a more senior leader and eventually make $200,000 plus. So in this video, I will talk to you about the top 6 skills you need to build in order to become a more senior leader in supply chain, and what are the top 5 jobs that pay that kind of money. My name is Jamil Hai, and I've been working in supply chain management positions across South Asia, Middle East, and North America for the last 20 plus years. And my mission is to help you build real life skills for your job and career that they don't teach you in college. And if you are preparing for a supply chain job interview anytime soon, you should definitely book a session with me, because I'm going to take your resume, the job description you're applying for, and based on a combination of those two and my 2 decades of experience, will give you some laser guided tips and tricks which will maximize your chances of success. So go ahead now and book your session. So let's first talk about the top 6 skills. And the first one is to have the technical command on your area. What do I mean by that? Let me tell you an interesting story. When I was very young, probably like 2 or 3 years into my supply chain career, I happened to walk through a factory with one of my very senior vice presidents of supply chain. And as I was doing that walkthrough, he was able to pinpoint things which I could not even imagine. He was like, because he built his career entirely in manufacturing, and he had managed supply chains, industrial engineering, you name it, right? Probably like he had 30 years of experience. But as he was even walking through the factory, he was able to pinpoint some very basic mistakes that that factory had done in terms of how they were managing their safety and so on. And I asked myself, like, this guy is so senior, but he is able to pinpoint those very specific areas. So the key point is that in order to become a senior leader in supply chain, you really need to have that technical command on your skill. Just like you cannot become the CFO of a company without really knowing the ins and outs of the P&L, how the cash flow is managed, and all the details of financials. You cannot become a senior supply chain leader without really understanding the fundamentals and the technical aspect of your area. Now, it's not necessary that you should know every single thing about what's happening in a factory. It all depends on where you spend the majority of your career in. So if you go back to the SCORE model, which you can see on your screen here, let's say you became a senior leader through manufacturing, so you will know everything about what goes on in a plant. Similarly, if you became a senior leader by doing a lot of jobs in logistics, then you will know about a lot of warehousing, or in planning, you will know a lot about the things like, safety stock modeling and all. The point is that you cannot be expected to become a senior leader in supply chain if you don't know the details of your trade. Imagine if you are a senior supply chain leader and you don't know the details of your area, you can be taken for granted very easily, right? So, and nobody will give you a job if that is a risk area for you. So knowing your technical area is very, very important. Now, the second most important skill in order to become a senior leader in supply chain is leadership and emotional intelligence. Of course, it goes without saying that you cannot become a senior leader without your ability to lead people. But why is it so important? Because imagine if you are an individual contributor who only focuses on his or her area, your impact on a company will be very limited. But if you are able to influence and lead 10, 100, 1,000 or even more people, then your impact on the organization is very high as well. And higher the impact, the more amount of money you can earn. There is a famous quote from this book called Unscripted by MJ DeMarco. This is a book written about entrepreneurship, but he mentioned something really interesting, that if you want to make millions, you need to impact millions. Similarly, if you want to make a higher salary, you need to be able to influence and lead more people. That is why leadership is so important. Now, I know there are a lot of books written about leadership, but one of my personal favorites is the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, written by John Maxwell, because this is such an amazing book, as it gives you those 21, I know 21 sounds a lot, but those are very interconnected principles or laws of leadership, and they are really your guiding light whenever you are in a leadership position. Some of the other concepts I want to talk about under the umbrella of leadership is something called situational leadership. I've made a video on this, which you can watch by clicking over here. Now, situational leadership is a model developed by Ken Blanchard, who is the author of the famous book 1 Minute Manager, and that framework is so helpful especially when you are managing a team where you have different skill sets. You could have someone who is a fresh graduate and someone who's been doing a job for maybe 20 years. How do you manage those different skill sets? So that situational leadership model, without going into a lot of detail, you can watch the video, really provides you that framework on how to lead and engage a diverse group of people like that. Another important question that you should be asking yourself as a senior leader is that, what is my leadership style? And in order to really determine what your leadership style is, try to study the leadership styles of others. And some of the great places to learn leadership styles is politicians or leaders or even CEOs of big companies. I've made 2 videos on this, which once again, I'm going to put the links here, which you can watch. One was studying the leadership styles of famous leaders like Gandhi, Margaret Thatcher, and so on. And another one focuses on the corporate leaders like Steve Jobs, Sundar Pichai, and so on. So those 2 videos will really help you understand like what are the different leadership styles and which ones do you subscribe more to. Because one of the questions that comes in senior leadership interviews, let's say you are applying for a supply chain director role or a senior supply chain director or a VP role, they will ask you, what is your leadership style? And you really need to have that self-awareness on how do you lead. So that will be really helpful. And finally, I really want to touch on the importance of emotional intelligence, especially in the post-COVID environment. A good leader cannot be someone who doesn't have emotional intelligence, because we all know that the number of mental health issues have gone up since COVID. And because we are mostly working remotely, it's very hard to understand people's body language sometimes. So whenever you have a tough meeting, and supply chain, unfortunately, we have a lot of tough meetings because we are always like going through interesting challenges, so to speak. So therefore, it's very important for you to keep an eye on how your team is feeling. Is your team engaged? Is your team excited? Is there any area where your team is not feeling very energized? So emotional intelligence is a very, very important component of leadership, especially in supply chain. The third skill is basically not a skill, but it's more of a guideline on how you should maneuver your career in order to get to that 200K plus salary, which is try to gain experience in different areas and different verticals within supply chain. Now, you can become a senior leader by someone who has worked in different industries, because then you bring a lot of different varieties. For example, if you have worked in, let's say for the sake of example, Coca-Cola, and you have worked in Chevron, then you bring an experience where you have got food and beverage experience, and you have also got the oil and gas experience, right? But similarly, within the same industry, it's easier for you to become a senior leader or qualify for a senior leader role if you have got a variety of experiences. Let's say if I look at the score model again, if you have worked in planning and sourcing, or if you have worked in manufacturing and planning and sourcing, then your chances of being eligible for, let's say, a senior supply chain director role are much higher, because you have not only gained expertise in one of the verticals, one of the areas of supply chain, but you have got a variety of experiences in different areas. So let's say if you have experience in sourcing and making, that means you can not only like run an operation, because you have probably run a factory or run an operation in the make area, but you can also negotiate complex contracts. You can negotiate with the suppliers because you have already worked in the sourcing area. So the more diverse your experience is within that score model, the higher the chances of you qualifying for a more senior leadership role in supply chain. The next skill is decision quality. Now, why is this so important? Because if you are aspiring to become a senior supply chain leader, you will be making some very critical decisions almost on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. So the quality of your decision making is absolutely important, and you need to build a track record over a period of time of taking good decisions that led to some hard savings or some significant breakthroughs or transformation for your specific supply chains that you are operating in. Now, this skill is generally called decision quality, but some companies have their own names for it. For example, Amazon calls this are right a lot. Leaders are right a lot. They have strong judgment and good instincts. They seek diverse perspectives and work to disconfirm their beliefs. So And we talked about this a lot in my podcast with Umair Feroz Awan, where we talked about how to find a job at Amazon, which you can watch by clicking over here. But you can see this is an example where one of the biggest supply chain companies in the world is putting so much emphasis on decision quality because you have to be good at this. Otherwise, several bad decisions over your career can really restrict your ability to become a more senior leader in supply chain. So therefore, decision quality is very important. And then the next skill, which is one of the most critical skills you need to have in order to become a senior leader, is financial acumen. You need to be able to think like a businessman. You need to be able to think like a GM if you want to become a senior supply chain leader. Not only about your specific areas, and we'll talk about that in a second, but you need to have a very good understanding of the general P&L of the company. So you should be able to also develop a point of view or a good informed understanding about like what is the company doing in the marketing area, what is the company doing in the sales area, how is the company managing its financials, like how are we making choices between profitability and cash flow and so on. Some of these areas of course affect supply chain, but what the point is that you need to have an overarching understanding of the P&L of the organization, because a good supply chain leader is a good financial manager as well. Otherwise, if you are just zoomed into your own supply chain space, but you don't really have a good understanding of how the business is making these financial calls, you will really struggle in a senior position. Similarly, you also need to have a very, very good grasp on what are the different cost elements and buckets of your own supply chain. So for instance, you need to have a very good idea on what is your cost to plan, cost to source, cost to make, cost to deliver. And I've covered all of these KPIs in a lot of details in the supply chain KPI video I made some time ago. But you really need to have a very good understanding on the cost, because if you don't have a good understanding of cost, imagine, let's say you are a very good planning manager. You really understand the stock modeling and how do we calculate safety stock and so on. That is really good. But if you really don't understand how that cost of planning is impacting the overarching cost of your supply chain, you will not be able to become a senior leader in supply chain, because you need to have that very good end-to-end understanding. And it will also help you in making more holistic decisions. Maybe sometimes focusing so much on finished goods is not the best idea if you have got a lot of problems going on in your raw materials. So those are the kind of strategic decisions you can make by having that overarching understanding of the financials. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, if you want to grow in your career and become a senior leader, networking and personal branding are extremely important. Networking has always been the most important thing. So you need to know senior people in your company. You need to be able to network with them. You need to share your problems with them, understand what the problems they are facing, and maybe try to help them out, because that networking will open up opportunities like never before for you. And I'm adding personal branding to it because this is another concept which is becoming more and more important. However, networking is important. In my own company, if I have to get a job or I have to apply for more senior roles, I have to constantly network with the right people in different segments and different areas. Otherwise, you are forgotten very easily, right? So how do you really make sure that you are having an intentional agenda in some shape or form where you are talking to more and more people, especially the more senior people? And don't get me wrong, this is like a lot of people stereotype this with, oh, there is a lot of politics and all of that. It's not politics. I mean, yes, politics is everywhere, but networking is different than playing a political game. Networking is really knowing as many people as possible so that when more senior opportunities come, people remember that, oh, I spoke to this guy and he was talking to me about this problem. He might be a very good senior manager or a director to do this job. And that is how these 200K opportunities are going to open up for you. Now that we have covered the skills, let's talk about the top 5 jobs which will help you earn that 200K plus. And once again, I'm going to go back to the score model to pinpoint in each of those score areas what are the different jobs which can pay you that kind of money. So the first one is in the sourcing area. So if you get a job of a sourcing director, now of course, not every sourcing director is going to make $200,000. So one very important thing to keep in mind here is that what industry you are in. So try to also maneuver your career into industries which pay you better than others. So not to throw my logistics friends under the bus, but logistics is an industry. If you're working in a 3PL, those industries don't pay generally as good as what, let's say, what a consumer goods or a food and beverage or what an oil and gas job is going to pay you. So you also have to be very strategic about which industry you are maneuvering yourself into. But generally, like a sourcing director in a decent sized company in a good industry will definitely pay 200K plus. The next job is in the planning space. So a senior director of planning can definitely be making $200,000 or more. Once again, industry dependent. But one thing which I want to call out is that especially post-COVID, you can see a lot more planning director jobs popping up than before, because I think one of the blessing in disguise for COVID for supply chain folks has been that the importance of planning has been highlighted. Otherwise, before COVID, my general impression, and I might be wrong because this is purely my opinion, is that supply chains used to be very, very cost focused. Let's outsource everything. Let's just cut the cost. Let's just have the most leanest supply chain possible. So there was a lot of focus on lean. Post-COVID, when people realize that, when you have got your supply chains in 15 different parts of the world, and when you have a crisis, putting them together is always difficult. A lot of more discussions are happening around contingencies, planning, and carrying more stock or carrying the right level of stock. And that automatically means that the importance of planning jobs has gone up. And therefore, now you can see senior planning director jobs which pay that kind of money. Next job that I would like to talk about that can pay you 200K plus is a plant director or a senior plant manager job, which is in the make area. Of course, plant manager jobs are not easy. You are dealing with hundreds of people, sometimes thousands of people. So those jobs are generally very, very well rewarded, because you are not only responsible for a lot of people, but you are also responsible for an operation. Imagine like 1 day of downtime in a plant can cost company millions of dollars. Therefore, plant director jobs or plant manager jobs are generally very highly paid. Once again, industry dependent. Similarly, in the logistics area, you could be a logistics and customer care director or a senior logistics director, where you are not only managing one warehouse, but you are managing maybe 5 or 6 or 10 warehouses. And then in that case, you have a lot of responsibility. You are managing different teams. You could be managing actually more people than a factory, because if you are managing 4 warehouses, for example, then you are responsible for the entire team there and the operation there. So once again, just like a plant manager, your impact on the business is much higher, and therefore these jobs are also highly rewarded. And that takes me to the last job, which is the supply chain VP job or a senior supply chain director job, where you are responsible for all these different areas in a mid-sized company, and that can easily pay more than $200,000. And then once again, you have got a lot of people responsibility. You have got a lot of, let's say, cost and P&L responsibility, because you are really someone who needs to bring in supply chain as a value add to the business, right? So value addition in supply chain is typically done through cost optimization, but also through some breakthrough innovations in the space of supply chain or transformation. Or if you come into a new job as a supply chain director and you say, if we just rejig this network, then we can save a lot of money. So you are someone who is also unlocking some of that hidden potential, both financially and human resource wise. So that's a job which would easily pay you $200,000 or more. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I've also made videos on topics like the highest paying jobs in the US and Canada, which you can watch by clicking over here. Keep watching.